loud. Okay. Lovely to see you, Harriet. Thank you so much for joining us on Quantum Woman podcast. Harriet is a good friend of mine. We've known each other for quite a while, and Harriet is a purpose-led coach. She's helping to develop conscious and authentic leaders, and she's all about helping clients create a better future, find their purpose, help them to tackle their overwhelm, and if you're stuck. So instead of surviving life, we can clarify our goals. So welcome, Harriet. Thank you for joining me.
It's a pleasure to be here. It's really lovely to take part. Yes,
well, thank you very much. So I wanted to ask you to just share with us, what was it that got you into business in the first place? What was your journey on the road to entrepreneurship?
Well, I mean, it's been quite sort of fractured is the word that came to mind, in that I described my career recently as a portfolio career. So originally I worked in finance in London and Tokyo a long time ago. I then found myself as a single mother to 4 children, and I wanted to, I guess that's what sort of precipitated me on a journey of self-discovery, and I think it's called personal development these days. And one of the things that came up for me initially, or not initially, but some years into it, was that in life, often people access the help of coaches at one point or another, and therapists. And with therapists, sorry, I had a brain freeze there. They access the help of therapists. And what I became very aware of is that there's a possibility of getting caught in the therapeutic loop and constantly going back and over, unpacking the past. And so I was really attracted to training to become a coach, to help people actually take action and move forward.
Yeah.
And so I trained as a coach 11 years ago, and at the same time decided to do a degree in fine art and various other little side issues, trained as a yoga teacher. But I love working with my clients to actually take them forward in their lives rather than stuck. Stuck is the best.
Yeah. That's really interesting you say it, because I found that in terms of that whole therapy piece, and and I've met lots of women who've had therapy, who've been stuck, and what I was hearing from them is they kept getting taken back to whatever they decided was the cause of their stuckness now, and I just felt that that's not helpful. I really do believe that if you've got a sort of a goal or a purpose ahead of you, that you can focus on that, and it really doesn't matter what has happened before. And I know some people have been through really, really traumatic times, but going back and going over and sort of chewing it over and over and over again, I'm not sure how that's really helpful. So it's interesting that you sort of feel like that as well. So what sort of things are you supporting clients with mostly?
It's really interesting. I was thinking about this before I came on this morning, and often clients come to me and they think that the issue that they'd like help with within a coaching context is they would like to change jobs. They'd like to take their business to a new level. I work with a lot of female entrepreneurs running small businesses. And once we start unpacking what's actually going on, that is obviously an action they want to take, but it's what's holding them back. And it comes down to 9 times out of 10, a lack of self-belief.
Yeah. I think it's a rare woman that I've met that doesn't have that at some level, that's, stopping her getting on, that sort of lack of self-belief, but also that self-sabotage, so almost as you're taking those steps forward is like, then I'm going to do something to stop myself as well now.
Yeah. And I know that you and I've discussed this in the past, but I know this is not apocryphal, But if a man sees a job application or a job description, and he'll read through them and he'll go, oh, I can do that, I can do that, I can't do that, or that, but I'll apply anyway. The woman will get to the bits that she can't do and then decide not to apply. So she doesn't actually put herself in the ring,
No.
to even be considered for the job. And so it's taking my clients from that place of hesitation and I'm not good enough to, yeah, why not? Let's give it a whirl and see what happens.
Yeah. I think I'm really interested as well, like, so your sort of initial career was in finance, which is a, you know, real non-traditional place for women. So what were you sort of the only woman in that area when you were working, especially in Tokyo, and you were working overseas?
I was hugely in a minority. And I oddly was talking to someone about this today. When I first started, I worked in, I was a stockbroker, and I had a female boss, which was really unusual in those days. And I built my client list literally from cold calling. But it wasn't quite cold calling. They were tiny bit warm because they were taking our research, but they weren't paying for it. So we had no broking relationship. And my boss, when I went to pick the phone up, she would go like this. And I would go, what's wrong, Debbie? And she says, I can't understand how you can do that. And I said, the worst case scenario is they'll say no.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so it was quite instructive just going over that the other day with somebody, because she was at the top of her game, and yet she had a huge fear at looking back of rejection. And there I was. I mean, I can't say that every day I was going, yay, this is great, but I did it. Yeah. And as a result, I built actually a really amazing client list, and the relationships I had with my clients were what mattered. It was the relationships that I built. It wasn't necessarily my unbelievable knowledge on any particular stock or share, although I had access to amazing research. It was those relationships, but they were all built by taking huge risks, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's another female trait, especially when we start our own businesses, is that risk averseness, and that, you know, that women tend not to take finance to start their own businesses. So was that something that you looked at when you were starting your own business, or have you noticed it with the women that you're supporting, about that whole sort of financial risk averseness?
Well, for me, the financial risk is how much money I was going to be able to generate. I wasn't going to I did, because it's just me. My business is me. I'm selling myself, for want of a better expression. I didn't need to raise money, but I know that I mean, a lot of the clients I work with, they don't really understand what the implications are of raising finance and all of that. But they ultimately, I help them understand it. If they don't understand it, there are other people out there that do, and they can get help in an area that they may not have as a strength.
Yeah. Yeah. So what about, so I think this sort of like is the other side of the coin to sort of raising finance. But when you're in the business now, one of the things that we're doing on a big piece of research on the moment is like the whole gender pay gap. So in corporates, you can see that that's happening, but within small businesses, I think there's two things. One is, you know, small businesses often don't have huge amounts of cash, you know, and then aligned with that, as female entrepreneurs, I don't think we value ourselves enough and pay ourselves what we're worth. So if I was to say to you, you know, Harriet, are you paying yourself what you're worth? What would you answer to that?
Probably not. Probably not. But I pay myself. Well, that comes back to, you know, what do I charge? And that's all tied up. I really strongly believe in our own sense of self and self-confidence, but I probably don't pay myself what I'm worth. I'm getting better at charging what I'm worth.
Yeah.
And taking the risk that someone will say no.
So how have you sort of helped yourself to sort of, you know, it always comes to that moment when you're talking to somebody and they sound like they're really interested, and then it's like, okay, at some point we're going to have to discuss money. How have you sort of taught yourself to really be confident about this is what I charge?
Well, this is an exercise I do with my clients. It's called resonant pricing. And I get them to close their eyes, and we get up. They tell me what their lowest figure is for whether it's a product or a service. And then I go through the numbers going upwards. And it is a very felt sense, which sounds an odd thing to say, but it is a very felt sense. And they'll suddenly go, yeah, that £1,000 or £2,000 or whatever. And so for me, I then use that on myself, and I take that into my work. And the more I get so much pleasure from seeing my clients make progress and actually do the things that they say that they want to do, that I'm finding it easier and easier to tell people, prospective clients, what I charge.
And
because I know it has great value.
Absolutely, I love that resonant pricing. I might have a playback with that myself. I have to get you to do that with me, Harriet.
Yeah, it's a really interesting exercise because it sounds really simple, but it's a visceral, felt sense. That's what I'm prepared to charge for this service.
Yeah. I had an example the other day, and I was talking to this lady about our program, and she really loved the sound of it. She said, oh, well, how much do I need to invest? And I really liked the fact that she said invest instead of what do I charge. And I've always struggled with not having that little wobble. I always feel like I'm confident to have the conversation about money early. I don't leave it till last or anything. But I just had a little wobble when I said the price, and actually she hasn't come back. And I just thought, do you know what? I think I might have just lost that because I had a wobble. And I've done this program for many years and charged for it, thousands of times, but I still had that little wobble there, like, oh God, it sounds a lot. And it isn't. And as you say, knowing the benefits that people come, even after just a couple of sessions, the benefits that, the women get out of it is still, that's there for me. And I think it's just there for so many women.
Oh yeah, I mean, I completely agree. And I mean, some of it must come from, I wonder whether, no, there's no must. I wonder whether it's nature or nurture, and whether women are just generally more likely to be hesitant when it comes to this is what it costs to work with me, or this is what my product costs. But it can, we can work on it.
Yeah, definitely. I think the thing for me is I think there's two things that happen. I think there's one, finance is just one of the, and money is just one of those big life things that become barriers, or we consider there's a lack of, and then because we're considering that, then guess what, that's what we find. And I know for me that comes from, I was brought up in a council estate, working class parents working their butts off for not a lot. And whenever we talked about money, it was that sarcastic, well, what are we going to pay for that with shirt buttons? Or just go to the end of the garden and get some money off the money tree. So that whole sense of lack and not being able to afford stuff is like really, really deep for me. But I also think for women, because we still do take that ultimate lion's share of looking after family and everything that goes on with that, there's so much competition for our money. And I think probably in our heads stuff goes on about, well, that's the price of a holiday, or, I've got to pay the mortgage every month. And I think these things fight. And because we are less likely to value ourselves, we don't think we deserve to spend that money on ourselves either, or invest that money in ourselves.
Yeah, it's really interesting. point that you raised there, because it made me think of a friend of mine who would say, she's very open and she runs her own business. She runs a dyslexic training business. And she's the first one in her family to go to university. And she has this amazing work ethic. And she says it comes from a very working class background, always working. So she over pushes herself. But there was something happened a few years ago where her 3 children are quite dyslexic, and she was absolutely terrified of her son going to the secondary school. And she decided to apply, slightly on the back of comment I made, it transpires, but she decided to investigate a bursary and a scholarship at the local private school. And what was really interesting, she told me her mother said, but people like us don't do things like that. And Joe said, but if I can get Billy in, it'll completely revolutionize his life. He's going to drop like a stone if he goes to this massive. And so what's hilarious is 5 years on, all 3 of her children are now at the private school. And she has this drive to earn the money, and her husband. To pay for it, but she's had to really overcome the mindset, and she's prepared to spend money on coaching to support her through that, because her go-to is, I shouldn't have things like that. Why am I working for things like that? So
that stuff's just so powerful, isn't it, in terms of, you know, I don't think anyone meant it or means it when they say those things, but they just, especially if they're said when you're very young, it just becomes a part of you, and it's really hard to overcome. So in terms of you set up your own business, you looked after, and brought up 4 amazing children. It's like, how did you juggle all of that going on?
Well, juggling is what it is. And actually, last night I was out on a sort of rooftop. I mean, it wasn't that dangerous, but unplugging a drain, because I looked out of the window and I saw that it was all full of leaves and stuff. And there's this part of me, it wasn't that late, it was like 8 o'clock at night. And I thought, when am I going to stop having to do things like this? So I'm constantly juggling. I'm either unblocking a drain, or I'm rushing. I mean, not anymore, my kids are grown up, but rushing to a school, possibly late. And you referred to, this is your expression, the voluntary role.
Yes.
But, I mean, in my case, I didn't even have a potential ex-husband who was going to do any of the voluntary role. I was doing the unpaid work as well as the paid work.
Yeah. I think I think COVID has really heightened that for me, about just the amount of unpaid work that women do, or the voluntary work that we do, in the lion's share of whatever needs doing. And I don't know about you, and I might be making a sweeping generalization, but I feel like when any of the news or anyone's been talking about homeschooling, it's the mums that are doing it. And even if the dads are working from home, they're stuck in some office, their dad's busy, dad's running his own business, and it's the woman that's doing even more juggling. They've got a job as well. They're trying to work from home. They're looking after the children. They're doing the homeschooling. And then when the kids are hungry, it's mum they come to say, Mum, what's for dinner, or what's for tea? And I'm like, this is just so, put the lens on this whole imbalance that goes on in, not just in the workforce, but in the, in the world of what work needs doing. It's the women that are doing the lion's share of that care stuff.
Yes. And I had a conversation with a friend of mine who was a partner of a law firm about 5 years ago, and she retired. And this was as her children were sort of growing up and leaving school. And I was sort of curious. And she said, I simply couldn't do it anymore. And she was married. And she said it was like juggling. And the great thing for me is, because I worked for myself. I've always worked I've worked for myself for 11 years. and I could make it flexible, so I could take on as many clients or reduce like my business as I chose. Whereas she was going into an office, if one of the children was ill, they rang her. They never rang her husband. And she said for her, it was like juggling. And as long as the balls were in the air, and she said they would all crash onto the ground when the nanny resigned. And her children jokingly say, and I don't think it's actually that funny, they had 24 nannies.
Oh dear.
24 different people. Now, whether my friend was just very bad picker, I can't judge that. But she would 100% say that she picked up well over, I mean, like 80%. I mean, her husband's a really lovely man, but of all the childcare and the extra work.
And I don't think that we're going to be able to deal, like as a society, about this, about the gender imbalance and the gender gap, which is not just about pay, the gap in you know, everything, until we sort out the fact that women just seem to do all of that stuff. And if I had the answer, I could probably earn a lot more money, but you know, who knows what that answer is. I think there's still this sort of patriarchal view that men are the breadwinners, and maybe it's not a conversation that it's not a word that you hear now, but I still think there is a sense that the man has to go out and earn all of the money, and the woman's doing the sort of care stuff.
Well, interesting that when you said that, what came up for me was I was thinking about the whole issue of male energy and feminine energy. And I was recently talking to someone about this in the context of climate change, which is an area I'm trying to expand my work into. And he was saying that until we value feminine energy equally to masculine energy, because he was referring to the fact that we've been a patriarchy has existed for hundreds and hundreds of years. But trying to sort of knock men down is completely counterproductive. It's just to be on a level playing field. And if I think back to when I worked in finance, and when I talk to friends of mine who still do, they will all say that they behave like men in order to be successful.
And that is definitely a key that we see in the research, is that what often happens is the women that really want to go out to achieve those sort of top level jobs or the senior level jobs, is they will often ape the men's behavior in order to, you know, kind of try and fit in, but to be seen as somebody that can. And then those women that, you know, look around and say, you know what, I don't want to be like that, then they vote with their feet, and they disappear. And that's another thing that we've seen with COVID. I think it's some research from McKinsey. They've interviewed senior women sort of during COVID, and they're saying like 25% of them are saying that they would choose not to go back. Now, whether or not they do is another thing, but I can't imagine what that is going to do for our sort of the work that's been done and achieved for gender, you know, balance and pay at senior levels. But if a lot of them are still willing to have that trade and say, you know, I am going to vote with my feet. I've seen through COVID that sometimes there's something better, and life's too short to be angling after, you know, those senior jobs, and basically you putting everything in and not getting so much out, and being, you know, I just think women are much more willing to make that trade-off.
Yeah, the sacrifices that they're prepared to make, or the trade-off. And we were talking about this piece of research, and I'm sure that the women in question, they probably already have a nanny, so they weren't necessarily struggling with homeschooling. I mean, I don't think we're talking about the poor people who were trying to set up desks on their ironing boards.
No,
and you know, their children were doing their homework on one smartphone. I suspect these kids had a nanny who was having to deal with the homeschooling, and they were sitting at home. But it enabled them to actually have lunch with their children.
Yeah.
Or to go for a walk with them in the afternoon, and they're not running to get on some type of public transport to get to the office in the first place,
Yeah.
and then be unbelievably productive during the day and then run home in the evening in time to do bath and bed. They just go upstairs and do bath and bed.
Yeah. And just start seeing the benefits of the simple things. I think it's probably given us all the time to do that. So one of the things you mentioned about getting into climate change, I know you're really passionate about that, as am I. I think it's a huge agenda. And again, COVID's highlighted a lot of the issues that, you know, seeing, I think it was the canals in Venice suddenly be clear. I'm like, oh my God, that's amazing. So, okay, yeah, what are we doing? And seeing literally my weekly shop, half of it going to the bin when I get home and clear, you know, put it away. There's so much plastic and stuff that's just not necessary. I keep thinking about strawberries, you know, coming in these big plastic buckets. And I'm like, what happened to a lovely old wooden strawberry punnet, you know? So your interest in that and sort of developing a, you know, a real passion around that, where do you think that's taking your business in terms of either growth or a new area to focus on?
Well, what's happening gradually is so many companies, whether they're small or large, are under pressure now to meet or to unpack for them what ESG targets are. And a lot of the word that often comes up for me with my clients is overwhelm. They're dealing with a lot of overwhelm, and climate change is a massively overwhelming topic. And so I am really there to ask the questions to help my clients work out what they can feasibly do within their business, and to actually look at, well, and to be very specific about the triple bottom line and people, planet, and then profit. And obviously they have to make a profit, but it feels as if a lot of my clients now, it's not at the expense of everything else. It's within a balance. So there's a lot of there are a lot of potential avenues in that area.
So you mentioned an acronym there, ESG. Tell us what that is.
Well, very interestingly, ESG, a friend of mine was in a boardroom the other day and they weren't quite sure what it was. And I thought, you have got to be joking me. So ESG is environment, social and governance.
Okay. Yeah.
And they were debating whether the S was sustainable. And I said, well, surely that's covered in environment. So that is environment is the climate change piece. Society is the people piece, and how we take care of our own employees and what the impact of our business is on other people, the social impact, and the governance will bring in profitability and making sure we're doing all the right things from that point of view.
So what sort of things can, you know, some of us are running small businesses, and I sort of think, well, we've got an office, we've got staff who are traveling in by cars, short of telling them they need to come in on a bike, you know, there's like what, and maybe buying sustainable energy. What sort of things should we be looking at?
Well, a lot of people, you know, I was talking to, I went into my hairdresser's the other day, and she was telling me she was very passionate about the climate. And apparently, I didn't know this, you can recycle hair. Don't ask me what happens to it. As it's a natural product, she says, I would have thought it just would have biodegraded anyway. So I don't understand. But as I'm talking to this incredibly nice woman, their Tesco's delivery arrived, and in came plastic bag after plastic bag full of those little mini plastic water bottles for the staff. And so it's as simple as things like that is, so have a water filter installed and no plastic bottles for water. And once people start looking around their environment, there are all sorts of little small changes.
Yeah.
And it's the small changes, because we can't individually, even Greta Thunberg knows that she is not, all she's done is raise awareness.
Yes. Yeah.
She can't do the work needed, and it's just little individual changes.
Yeah. And I think sometimes, like, having a purpose like that, purpose driven businesses, and I know you sort of share this view as well, is that if we haven't got that purpose, if we haven't got that drive to get us out of bed in the morning, then actually, what will? But also sometimes our purpose could be so big that actually in our whole lifetime dealing with it, we might not be able to make a huge difference. But I think, like you say, it's that those little things that we could be doing. And I've just found shampoo bars in my life, and I'm like, they are amazing. And like, apparently one bar lasts the amount of time of 3 bottles of shampoo. So I'm thinking, well, if every time I buy a shampoo bar, I'm not buying 3 bottles of plastic shampoo, shampoo in plastic, then that's my little thing. I definitely have changed from plastic water bottles to glass. But I'm still not convinced that when I put them in the recycling bin that they're actually going to somewhere where they are properly dealt with.
Yeah, and I think the more people wake up to this, I mean, when I first started recycling plastic, whenever it was, everyone in my family sort of laughed at me as I rinsed it out and putting it in the recycling. And of course, we now know that a huge amount of that actually gets shipped off to other countries, and that's actually how it ends up in the sea.
Yeah.
Often. But the more we individually raise awareness, we do our part, and we also put pressure on governments, because until some of this legislation comes from the top down, the small companies doing their best at the bottom here, of course they're making a difference, but the big multinational companies are still doing exactly what they want. And it has to probably, the way it's really going to change is when governments start bringing in legislation. I mean, I'm always absolutely gobsmacked when someone actually buys a plastic bag in a supermarket.
Yeah.
But they still do, and they're now 10p a bag. So charging for them did an amazing job, and that was brought in by government.
Yes.
And so more and more government-led initiatives will help.
Definitely. I think with any of these changes, the same as the gender, when you look at places like the Nordic countries and what they've done for legislation and regulation around the gender pay gap, and having more women on boards, 10 years after they introduced that, there is now no gender pay gap. There are equal number of men and women on boards. And men take maternity or paternity leave as much as women. That those things start to happen, and you forget what actually was put in place to make them happen. So I'm a firm believer in that legislation and regulation actually makes things happen, but I'm also a firm believer in the bottom up stuff. So I mean, my mum said something and I just thought, that's an amazing idea. She said, I sometimes get home from Tesco's or wherever she's been shopping, and she just said, I'm just going to get all this stuff and I'm going to go and dump it back on them and say, there you go, you can have that back, you get rid of it. And I just thought, actually, if we all did a bit of that, then maybe they would start to listen, and I know why punnets have gone out in shops, because they want shelf ready packaging that enables them to stack it all on the shelf and maybe not have so much wastage. But then they're not thinking about anything other than profit when they stick stuff in plastic. They're really not thinking actually when it comes to the environment, and a lot of these things around gender and getting balance in their boardrooms. I think there's a lot of lazy thinking that goes on.
Yeah, and it's when you mention supermarkets, I had a conversation recently around the impact of supermarkets. So I spend quite a lot of time on the Isle of Wight, and in the village where I live, there used to be 10, maybe more shops. There's now 1, a post office. And the reason there's 1 is a Tesco's, a big Tesco's opened up in the 80s, and it's now been increased in capacity. It's massive.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
it completely killed all the local shops.
Mm.
And the problem, and one of my other sort of passions is community.
Yeah,
And we've lost that sense of community. And, you know, you can chat, and I always do, to the girl at the Tesco's checkout, but it'll be a different person the next time you go. It's not the same as
yeah,
going into the butcher. So then this comes around full circle to, well, if there are more women in the workplace, do they have the time to go to the butcher, the baker, the candlestick maker to
yeah,
buy their food? So we gain and we lose at the same time.
yeah,
It's trying to
yeah,
find a balance in people's lives.
yeah. It's really difficult, isn't it? So in terms of where you're going with your business next, you know, what plans have you got? What's maybe stopping you get where you want to get to?
I think my plans are, my business has always grown organically. It's word of mouth and referrals.
Yeah.
I keep telling myself I should do a website, but I have never got around to it. So maybe one of the things I'm going to do is a website, but I have colleagues who've been in business for 20 years and they still don't have websites. So maybe I'm aware of the fact that might be a distraction because it takes quite a lot of time.
Yeah.
I really, really want to expand further into the climate change sustainable space.
Yeah.
And so that's where my focus is. And I'm very much, when I say targeting, I'm sort of talking to people in that world to see how I can expand my business into that area. So that's what I'm putting most of my energies in.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I think it's definitely a massively growing need, isn't it? And, you know, you've got the passion for it. Well, in terms of, you know, your journey today, what are the sort of difficulties or barriers that you've had to overcome?
Well, the biggest personal barrier I have to overcome is the fact that I'm dyslexic.
Right.
And often
Yeah.
I've worked with clients who are dyslexic, and we make great entrepreneurs, she says.
Yeah.
Because we think out of the box. But I find when I'm sent massive amounts of information, I think, whoa, okay.
Yeah.
But so my biggest obstacle I've overcome is being dyslexic, but I've written 2 dissertations and done 2 degrees, and so it's all perfectly possible. I just approach it in a different way to other people. And I mean, maybe I'm odd in that I don't think being a woman necessarily, I mean, I actually think when I worked in finance, being a woman was an advantage.
Yeah.
Because I built proper deep relationships with my clients, that I know my male colleagues kept them it was always very much business.
Yeah.
And there's good and bad to that. But for me, it was a much more rewarding job, really getting to know the people I was working with.
Yeah. I think that's great. And so in terms of especially with your dyslexia, are there any tools that you use that sort of really help you?
The biggest tool, which I often use with clients, is time blocking, and also breaking down the task that I have. Because if I'm looking at it and it's this big, it's so overwhelming that I don't know what to do it. But if I say, okay, well, this is what I'm going to do today. I'm going to do a small section, tick, done. So I'm going to do that for a certain amount of time and then I walk away from it. So those are the most useful tools for me.
I think it's that whole thing, you know, there's a lot of overwhelm comes, I think, because we look at this huge thing, whatever it is in front of us, whether that be our goal or something that we think we would like to achieve or need to achieve, and seeing it as a whole is really, really quite overwhelming. And there's a couple of sayings that, you know, how to eat the elephant, you know, one piece at a time, but also I like inch by inch is a cinch, yard by yard is hard. You know, it's like everything, you know, where we're facing that overwhelm, I think it's a brilliant tool to go, okay, how can I, you know, if I've got to walk 1,000,000 miles, then I know that I can walk the next mile. I will be able to do that. And then when I've done that, then I can walk the next one. So yeah, I think it's a really good tool to use in anything where you've got that bit of overwhelm and not sure what to do. So I try not to keep your eye on the goal, but actually chunk it right down and do it in little pieces. Really good advice there. So before we finish, got a couple of questions to ask you, but first of all, like you've said you haven't got a website, but how do people find you, Harriet?
They find me on LinkedIn, Harriet Stevens on LinkedIn. And as I said, most of my clients come to me from referrals and word of mouth.
Yeah.
So maybe I should get on and get the website. Maybe I'll think
Who
about
knows? I mean, a lot of people, especially when you're delivering like a personal service, like coaching, you know, so many people get all their business from referrals and LinkedIn. So I suppose it's a case of does it work for you? And like, what other work would you have to put in to drive traffic to a website? You know, everyone, well, not everyone goes on LinkedIn, but loads of people go on LinkedIn.
LinkedIn is such an amazing resource, and the more I learn about using it, the more I enjoy using it.
Yeah.
But those of my colleagues who do have websites, they say the only time anyone ever uses it is if they've had a conversation with them with a view to coaching.
Then they check you out.
They go and check them out.
Yeah. Interesting. I do think sometimes that we put a lot of emphasis on having a website, but I do think that especially when people are buying you personally, you've got to get to see. No one's going to buy, I don't believe, a big product like coaching or a program like we do from a website without even having a conversation with you. So I think it is about building those relationships and finding the place that you can do that. Definitely. So we've been collecting examples of great books for the Quantum Woman book club that we are building. So is there one book that you've read that, you know, it might be a personal development or a leadership one or philosophy, or it could be, you know, just a great book, holiday read? Is there one book that you would recommend to our listeners and viewers?
Oh God, I mean, despite the fact I'm dyslexic, I love reading. My favorite novel has always been Any Human Heart by William Boyd, and A Million Little Pieces by James Frey, which I found fascinating. And I was thinking about the personal development book. I have got so many different personal development books. Making the Leap by Gay Hendricks.
Okay, yeah.
If I'm going to pick one, Making the Leap by Gay Hendricks.
Okay, well, we shall add that to our book club list.
And actually, I was just listening the other day to a podcast that you will have listened to as well, and Unstoppable Teams by Alden Mills. I really liked him. I don't know why.
I really like him too. Yeah, some great tips and there's so much you can get from podcasts, you know, and not just, you know, people who are, you know, famous in that field, you know, like people like you and I, you know, sharing tips and you know, their own tribes, which is what I love about, you know, a podcast or YouTube, and, you know, even on Instagram and Facebook, love it or loathe it, you can create a really great tribe of people who just share your passion, you know, sharing ideas. And I think they're so powerful, those mediums. And then finally is we're collecting anthems, so for a playlist. So like, is there a song that sort of gets you really inspired or motivated or helps you to relax and chill?
Well, one of my favorite songs, and there's some great flash mob footage if you Google it on the internet, is Black Eyed Peas and I've Got a Feeling.
Oh yes,
it's just such a good track, and they did an amazing with Oprah Winfrey, a flash mob in Chicago. And in another life, I would have been in I mean, I'm about to date myself, but I would have been in Pan's People on Top of the Pops. I've always wanted to do that synchronized dancing.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I remember that. That's so good. Well, thank you so much, Harriet, for taking the time to spend with us today. We really grateful for you for taking that time. Some great tips in there, and we look forward to speaking to you again at some point soon, catching up with your journey on the climate change agenda. So I'd love to catch back up with you on that. So thank you very much for that.
Absolute pleasure. It's been great to be here. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye.